In the grand Whitmore mansion, silence reigned, broken only by the faint hum of the heating. Outside, the wind howled, but inside it was warm. Too warm for Grace, who had not sat down in 14 hours. Her turquoise maid's uniform was wrinkled, and yellow gloves concealed a fresh bruise on her hand. Still throbbing, Grace had long ago learned to keep her head down and remain silent whenever a tense atmosphere filled the house. But tonight was different. On a thin white blanket spread directly on the carpets slept the twins, tiny in matching pale blue onesies. They had only just turned 3 months old, and in the cold of the night they seemed too fragile for the world. Grace knelt beside them, watching their small chests rise and fall in perfect sync. When she took this job 6 months ago, she was told her duties would be only cleaning. But the truth surfaced within a week. Nannies in this house never stayed long. One resigned, and a replacement was not hired. It was easier to heap every responsibility on Grace than to search for another. The mother of the twins had died 3 months ago in childbirth, leaving 2 infants who would never know her warmth. In the household they spoke of her in whispers, as though a loud voice might disturb her memory. And their father, Elliot Whitmore, was a man whose name thundered on the stock exchanges, whose voice silenced entire halls. But to his children, he remained only a shadow. This evening, the twins had cried for nearly an hour. Grace tried everything: bottles, rocking, soft lullabies in their native tongue. One baby burned with fever, clenching his fists in discomfort. The other wailed until his voice grew hoarse. When they finally quieted, Grace's back ached and her hands trembled from fatigue. A lamp in the living room cast a soft golden glow on the carpet. Grace dared not carry the babies to their cold nursery with its hard mattresses. Instead, she stayed with them in warmth, settling on the floor so they would not be alone. Her head rested on her hand, just a few inches from the babies. She felt their heat, heard their quiet breathing. Exhaustion washed over her in waves, but she forced herself not to close her eyes. If the infant stirred, she needed to be alert. The house was too quiet to warn her. The door opened silently. Fast, certain steps sounded in the living room. Elliot Whitmore froze in the doorway. His impeccable dark blue suit and crimson tie contrasted sharply with his crisp white shirt. In one hand, he gripped a briefcase, the other still rested on the doorknob. His gaze fixed on the scene before him, a maid lying on the floor beside his children, and the twins, sleeping on the carpet, their flushed cheeks pressed together. What, for God's sake, is going on here? His voice sharpened as he stepped further in. Grace jerked. Her eyes flew wide. Her heart pounded as she sat up abruptly, glancing between Elliot and the twins. One of the infants stirred, letting out a soft whimper. I asked a question. Elliot's voice turned even colder as he advanced into the room. Why are my children on the floor? And why are you lying next to them like? He broke off, his gaze lingering on the bruise on her cheek. What's happened to your face? Grace opened her mouth, but words tangled. They were crying, she finally managed, voice shaking. No one came. They needed care. There's no nanny, no, he interrupted, coldly firm but quiet. There must be a nanny. I have one hired. No, Grace said again, meeting his eyes, though her voice trembled. There is no one but me. Something flickered on Elliot's face: shock, pain, regret, but his voice remained ice. We will talk in my study now. Grace looked at the sleeping twins and felt her heart tighten. She did not know how that conversation would uncover the truth, how these children ended up in her charge, and where she had gotten those bruises. Slowly, with her knees stiff and aching from long hours on the floor, she rose. Elliot watched every motion as she carefully stood, trying not to stir the babies. Their warmth still clung to her skin, a reminder of why she stayed. In the study, the door clicked softly closed. The flickering fireplace cast orange shadows across Elliot's face, accentuating the sharp lines of suspicion in his eyes. Explain. He slammed his briefcase on the desk. Grace took a deep breath, her hands trembled. The twins, there's been no proper care for weeks. The last nanny quit, and no one came to replace her. I clean, cook, watch them because there is no one else. Today one had a fever. I couldn't leave them in their cold nursery, so I stayed with them where it was warm. His jaw clenched. That still doesn't explain why you were lying beside them. Grace steadied her voice. I was exhausted. I have worked from dawn. I haven't eaten. They finally stopped crying, and I almost closed my eyes. But I would do it again if it made them feel safe. Elliot's expression shifted. Anger gave way to something heavier. And the bruise? He asked softly. Grace instinctively touched her cheek. One of your guests, she whispered. Last week at a party was carrying a tray in the hallway. He said I was in the way and shoved me. I fell. No one noticed. Or maybe they did. But nobody cared. Elliot leaned back, gripping the desk's edge. He remembered that night. The clinking glasses, the laughter, the parade of his so-called friends in the hall. He had been upstairs, finalizing a deal by phone. He hadn't seen or perhaps refused to see. You should have told me, he muttered. Gracie's voice quavered. Would it have changed anything? You don't even see them, Mr. Whitmore. You don't see your sons. They have only me, just me, a servant. Silence hung heavy in the room. Elliot turned to the window. The firelight flickered in his eyes. His thoughts spun. Images of his late wife, the newborn cries. All those days when he buried himself in work, so he would not feel the void she left. Finally he spoke. Stay here. He strode out of the office. Grace froze, unsure what he meant. Moments later, his footsteps returned. He held in each hand the small pale blue blankets from the nursery. Without a word, he carefully covered the sleeping twins, tucking the edges snugly around them. Grace watched, frozen in the doorway. For the first time, she saw him kneel beside them. They are smaller than I remembered, he murmured. His hand hovered above their heads, as though he feared to touch something so fragile. Grace stepped closer. Her voice, soft but firm, broke the silence. They need you, not just your name on birth certificates. Elliot raised his eyes, and for an instant his face reflected the full weight of what he had missed. I was a coward, he confessed, voice trembling. I thought if I drowned myself in work, I would not feel the pain of loss. But I've lost more that way than I could have imagined. From this moment forward, it will be different. You will no longer clean this house unless you want to. You will become their official nanny, with appropriate pay. And anyone who ever raised a hand to you will never cross these doors again. Grace stood speechless, her chest tight with surprise. Why? She whispered. Because you protected my children when I failed too. And I refused to fail either them or you again. In the weeks that followed, the Whitmore mansion began to awaken. Its cold walls, steeped in solitude, seemed to thaw under the warm rays of change. Elliot began to appear at breakfast, sitting at the table with the twins. He read them children's stories, his deep voice gentle as they stretched for colorful pages they could not yet understand. Grace watched, feeling for the first time the tension ease from her shoulders. Her laughter came more often in the house, not from duty, but from genuine joy. The twins, as though sensing the shift, became calmer. Their capricious crying gave way to curious gaze as their tiny hands reached more often for her. Or for Elliot. The house no longer resembled a marble flood museum with cold corridors. It became a home again, a place where voices echoed, laughter rang, and even the occasional baby cry felt less frightening than before. One rainy evening, Grace sat on a soft couch in the living room with the twins. One baby slept curled against her shoulder, the other tugged at her sweater, emitting tiny cooing sounds. Rain pattered on the tall windows, but inside it was cozy. The door creaked, and Elliot appeared earlier than usual. His jacket slung loosely over one shoulder, his hair tousled by the wind. He paused and smiled at the sight. Is there room for one more? He asked gently. His voice held no commanding edge, only warmth. Grace nodded. He sat beside her, carefully lifting the twins into his lap. One childhood hand grasped his finger, the other nestled against his chest as if seeking shelter. Grace leaned back against the couch, finally exhaling. For the first time in months, she felt she could simply exist not as maid, not as nanny, but as someone needed by these children. That night, when the rain outside ceased and soft calm settled in the house, all four slept in one room. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Grace lay on the couch, the twins in their cribs drawn closer to the fireplace, and Elliot in an armchair opposite with a book open on his lap. His eyes closed on their own. The book crept to the floor, but the changes extended far beyond the walls of the mansion. Elliot began uncovering what had happened under his roof. He summoned the house manager to answer why no one had told him the nanny had departed, and why Grace had been forced to shoulder every duty alone. The manager's answers were evasive, but Elliot was not a man to accept half-truths. He examined records, interviewed staff, and soon the full truth surfaced. The manager, seeking to cut costs, had decided not to hire a replacement nanny, placing all the burden on Grace, who was already exhausted. Elliot dismissed him that very day. He hired a new house manager whom he trusted, with explicit instruction: children are the priority in this house. Grace received not only a new title but a team of assistants, so she could devote herself to the twins without collapsing under chores. Her salary increased, and more importantly, she felt respect not just from Elliot, but from the entire staff. One evening, when the twins were asleep, Elliot invited Grace into his office. She entered, bracing for a serious talk, but instead, he handed her a small box. "This is for you," he said awkwardly, "for everything you have done." Inside was a simple but elegant bracelet, understated yet engraved with two tiny hearts symbolizing the twins. Grace froze, unsure how to respond. "I can't accept this," she began, but Elliot shook his head. "It's not payment, it's gratitude." A month passed. The mansion was fully transformed. Grace no longer wore a maid's uniform. Now she dressed comfortably, able to play with the twins or carry them on walks in the garden. Elliot spent more time at home, sometimes cancelling meetings to have dinner with his sons. He learned to change diapers, stutter through lullabies, laugh when one baby smeared food across his shirt. One sunny day, Grace, Elliot, and the twins strolled in a nearby park. They walked slowly with the stroller. The babies cooed happily, waving tiny arms. Passers-by smiled at the unusual sight: the wealthy businessman carrying a baby bottle, and the young woman whose devotion to these children was evident in every gesture. At that moment, Grace realized this house was no longer just her workplace. It was her home, her family, not in title or role, but in what truly matters: love, care, and showing up in the hardest moments. That evening, returning inside, they gathered in the living room. The twins slept, tucked in warm blankets. Elliot looked at Grace and quietly said, "Thank you for teaching me how to be a father." Grace smiled. Her eyes glistened in the firelight. "And thank you," she whispered, "for teaching me to believe that change is possible." In the house that had once echoed only with cold and loneliness, now laughter, warm voices, and the gentle breathing of two babies finally had a place to call home.